Hello, Pack. Tonight's story starts with a woman who didn't know what she was walking into. She was following a sound, something small and desperate beneath 3 feet of collapsed snow, and she had no idea that the moment she pulled the first pup free, she would set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The territory she'd crossed into was closed to outsiders, had been for 6 years. And the king who ruled it had spent those 6 years learning not to feel anything he couldn't afford to lose. He was doing fine at it. Until the bond hit him like a wall and he was already running before he understood why. She came to rescue 4 pups from a collapsed den. She had no idea she was already written into everything else. Let's begin. The snow had been falling since the previous afternoon, the kind of heavy, wet snow that came in late winter and didn't announce itself. It simply arrived and kept arriving until the landscape was something else entirely. Mara had been tracking the sound for 20 minutes before she found the site. A hillside den, the entrance completely buried under a shelf of snow that had slid from the ridge above, the whole structure compressed by the weight. She'd heard it from the trail. A thin, reedy crying that most people would have taken for wind. She didn't take it for wind. She set down her pack and started digging with her hands. She was a healer. Not the kind with a title or a formal haul, but the practical kind. The kind who traveled between territories with a worn leather bag and a reputation that moved faster than she did. She'd been passing through this region on her way north when the storm caught her, and she'd taken the lower trail through the ridge to avoid the worst of the wind. She had not technically been aware that the lower trail crossed into the Ashveil territory. The boundary markers were buried under the same snow that had buried the den. She got the first pup out in 4 minutes. It was small, barely 6 weeks, its fur matted and its eyes half shut with cold, and it made a sound when she lifted it that was somewhere between a cry and a sigh of relief. She tucked it inside her coat and kept digging. The second came out easier. It had been pressing against the first, and when the first was removed, it tumbled forward into the gap she'd made. She tucked it alongside the first. The third was at the back of the den, curled tight against the far wall, and she had to press her whole arm into the snow to reach it. By the time she had all 3 against her chest, she was breathing hard, and her fingers were numb, and she was calculating how far to the nearest shelter when she heard the 4th. Fainter, deeper in. She went back in. She was still half inside the collapsed den, her legs in the snow and her upper body underground in the dark, when she heard them. Not the pups. Something else. The sound of large bodies moving fast through snow, the particular rhythm of wolves running hard, and then stopping, all at once. The silence that followed was different from ordinary silence. It had weight. She backed out of the den carefully, the 4th pup cradled against her chest, and straightened to find herself surrounded. There were 12 of them in their shifted forms, large, gray, and dark, arranged in a loose half-circle around the hillside. Every single one of them had stopped moving. They were very still in the way that predators are still when they are not deciding whether to act, but have simply forgotten momentarily that action was the plan. Their heads were lowered, not in threat, something else. Then the 13th arrived. He came through the tree line at the top of the ridge and stopped at the crest, looking down. He was in human form, which told her he'd shifted back before she could see him, or had never shifted at all. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, wearing nothing appropriate for the temperature, which she filed away as either supernatural constitution or poor planning. His face was still from a distance, but even from 30 feet away, she could see the moment he registered what he was seeing. The 12 wolves bowed around a woman standing in the snow with 4 pups tucked inside her coat, because something moved through his expression that he immediately locked down. He descended the ridge in long, even strides. The wolves did not move as he approached. They stayed bowed. He stopped 6 feet from her. His eyes were gray, the particular gray of overcast sky before snow, and they were doing something complicated that his face was not doing. "You're on Ashveil land," he said. His voice was flat and even, the kind of voice that had learned to carry authority by removing everything that wasn't necessary. "I'm aware of that now," she said. She looked down at the 12 bowed wolves. "Are they all right?" A pause. "They're fine. They're not moving. I know." She looked back at him. "Is that because of me?" He held her gaze for a moment that was a fraction too long. "Yes," he said, and nothing else. And the way he said it told her the answer was both simpler and more complicated than the words suggested. "I found 4 pups under a collapsed den," she said. "I'm a healer. I wasn't trying to cross the boundary. The markers are buried. I'll leave as soon as I know the pups are stable." He looked at the pups. Something moved in his face again, brief and carefully managed. "Those are pack pups," he said, "from the eastern den. We've been looking for them." The den collapsed under the ridge snow. She shifted the bundle in her coat. "The 4th one is the coldest. Do you have somewhere warm?" He looked at her for another of those fractionally too long moments. Then he said, "Come with me," and turned and walked back toward the tree line, and the 12 wolves rose from their boughs and fell into formation around them both. And Mara followed the Alpha King of Ashveil through the snow with 4 of his pack's pups tucked against her chest, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that her heart was doing something she had no framework for. His name was Calder. She learned this not from him, but from the woman who met them at the fortress gate. A compact, efficient woman named Senna, who appeared to serve as both housekeeper and general coordinator of everything, and who took in the situation with one sweep of her eyes and immediately began directing people toward warm rooms and dry blankets without being asked. The fortress was old. Not crumbling, but old in the way that things are old when they have been continuously inhabited and continuously maintained. Stone worn smooth in the high-traffic passages, ironwork dark with age, fires burning in every room they passed through. It smelled like wood smoke and cold air, and something underneath both of those things that Mara's body responded to before her mind could weigh in. She spent the first hour focused entirely on the pups. She had her bag, which was the important thing, and the warm room Senna had put her in had a fire that was doing its job. And by the end of that hour, all 4 pups were stable, warm, fed from the small supply of emergency formula she carried, sleeping in a pile on a folded blanket near the hearth. The mother wolf, when she was brought in, went straight to them without looking at Mara at all, which Mara found both professionally satisfying and personally amusing. Calder appeared in the doorway when she was washing her hands. He didn't come in. He stood at the threshold. She noticed this. The precise placement of him, one shoulder against the frame, not crossing the line, and looked at the pups, and then at her. "They're stable," she said before he could ask. "The 4th will need monitoring tonight, but I don't expect complications." "You'll stay then." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a command either. It sat somewhere between them, waiting to be assigned a shape. "If that's all right," she said. "It's all right." He looked at the pups again. Something in his face was doing the same thing it had done on the ridge, moving, briefly, before being managed. "Thank you," he said. Flat and final, the way he said everything, but she heard the weight underneath it. She nodded. He left. She stood in the warm room with 4 sleeping pups and a fire that was doing its job and tried to identify what was happening in her chest. She counted the stones in the fireplace surround. 17. She did that sometimes when she needed something to hold on to. She was still counting when she fell asleep in the chair. She had been in the fortress for 2 days before she understood the shape of what she'd walked into. She understood pieces of it earlier. She understood on the first morning that the pack members she passed in the corridors went still when she approached, not the bowing stillness of the ridge, but a quieter version, a pause, a slight lowering of the head. She understood, by the second afternoon, that this was not wariness. She'd been around enough shifter packs to know wariness, and this wasn't it. This was something else. Recognition, maybe, except that she didn't know what they were recognizing. She understood, by the second evening, that Calder knew what it was and was choosing not to tell her. She could read it in the particular way he didn't look at her, the controlled, deliberate quality of his attention when they were in the same room, the way his jaw set when she said something that surprised him, the way his eyes went quieter each time she held his gaze for a fraction too long. She was a healer. She read bodies for a living. His was telling her things his voice was not. On the second evening, she found him in the room they'd given her to work in, a small study off the main corridor with a table and good candlelight and access to the fortress's supply of medicinal stores. He was standing at the window when she came in, looking out at the courtyard below, and he didn't turn when she entered. "The fourth pup is fully stable," she said. "I'll be able to travel tomorrow if the trail is clear." A pause. "The trail won't be clear tomorrow." She looked at the window. The snow was coming down again, lighter than before, but steady. "The day after, then?" "Perhaps." She set her bag on the table and began sorting through what she'd used, cataloging what needed replacing. The silence between them had a texture, not uncomfortable exactly, but present. The kind of silence that was aware of itself. "What is it?" she said, without looking up from her bag. "What is what?" "What the pack is doing when I walk past them. What you're not saying." She looked up then. He had turned from the window. His face was still, but his eyes were doing the complicated thing again. "I've been in enough territories to know when something is being managed around me. I'd rather know what it is." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "There's a bond mechanic in pack law, older than most of the formal structures. When an mated wolf's bond responds to someone, involuntarily, without choice, the pack can sense it. They respond to the person the bond has recognized." She held his gaze. "And your bond has recognized me." "Yes, since the ridge." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a flinch. "Before the ridge," he said, and then stopped, as if the words had gotten out ahead of his intention. She filed that away. "What does that mean for me, practically?" "Nothing, unless it's named. An unnamed bond doesn't bind either party." He said it carefully, each word set down with precision. "You're free to leave. The recognition doesn't create obligation. But the pack will keep responding to me as long as I'm here." "Yes." She looked back at her bag, counted the vial she'd used. 14. "All right," she said. "Thank you for telling me." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not frightened." "Should I be?" "Most people find it unsettling." "I find unsettling things useful," she said. "They usually mean something important is happening." She closed her bag. "I'm going to check on the pups. Good night." She left him at the window, and she did not let herself think about the word "before" until she was back in her room with the door closed and the fire burning low. And then she thought about it for a long time. The trail was not clear on the third day, or the fourth. On the fourth day, Senna put her to work. It was done practically and without fanfare. Senna simply appeared in the doorway of the study where Mara was reorganizing her medicinal stores for the third time and said, "Bren's shoulder has been wrong since the autumn, and he won't let the pack healer near it. Would you look at it?" And Mara said yes, because she was a healer and that was what healers did. And by midday she had seen 4 pack members, and by evening she had seen 7, And by the end of the 5th day, she had a working knowledge of the fortress's medical history going back 18 months and a list of chronic complaints that the pack healer, a nervous young man named Thomas, who turned out to be grateful rather than territorial, had been struggling to address alone. She was useful. She had always been most comfortable when she was useful. Calder watched all of this from a careful distance. She was aware of him in the way she was aware of the fire, peripherally, constantly, a source of warmth that she was choosing not to look directly at. He appeared at mealtimes and said little. He appeared in the courtyard in the mornings and trained with his pack in a way that was efficient and unself-conscious, and she watched him once from the study window, and then made herself stop watching and go back to work. On the 5th evening, he came to find her in the study, which had become, by default, her room for working. "You've been treating the pack," he said. "Senna asked me to." "I know." He sat down across the table from her, which was new. He had not sat in her presence before, had always remained standing, and the shift was small, but she noticed it. "Thomas says you found a joint inflammation in Bryn's shoulder that he'd missed for 4 months. "Tomas is good," she said. "He just needs more experience with the older presentations. I showed him what to look for." Calder was quiet for a moment. "You showed him." "He's your pack's healer. He should know how to treat your pack." She looked up from the manuscript she'd been reading, an old pack medical text she'd found on the shelf, dense and fascinating. "I won't always be here." Something moved across his face, there and gone. "No," he said, "you won't." The silence stretched. Outside, the wind had picked up again, pushing against the stone walls of the fortress, with the particular sound of late winter determination. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The bond, before the ridge, what does that mean?" "You said before I arrived, before the den, before I crossed the boundary." She kept her voice level, clinical, the voice she used when she needed information that would be useful for a diagnosis. "I need to understand the mechanics." He looked at her for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table. She noticed his hands, the stillness of them, the deliberate placement. "It means the bond recognized you before I could see you," he said. "At the gate, when it opened. She processed this. The main gate, when I came through the territory?" "Yes." "And you felt it then?" "Yes." "And you were already running when—" "Yes." Flat, final. A word that had been picked up and examined before being set down. She looked back at the manuscript. The words didn't resolve into meaning for a moment. "How long has it been since the bond responded to anyone?" she asked. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the others. Longer, weighted differently. 6 years, he said. She held very still. Since my first mate died." He said it the way he said everything, flat and final, but she could hear what it cost. 3 years after we were bonded, an illness. Quick. A pause. I spent the following 3 years learning not to feel the absence. I was doing well enough at it. She looked at him. He was looking at his hands. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it in the plain, uncomplicated way. Not as a preamble to anything, just as the thing itself. He nodded once. "The bond doesn't ask a permission," he said. "It doesn't consult your history. It simply responds." He looked up then, and his eyes were very quiet. "I'm not telling you this to create pressure. You're free to leave when the trail clears. I want you to know what you're leaving, so the choice is fully informed." She held his gaze. "What am I leaving?" He was quiet for a moment. "A bond that has been waiting 6 years and found you in a collapsed den in the snow," he said. and a pack that has been responding to you since the moment you arrived as if you've always been here. A pause. And me, trying to be honest with you about something I haven't been honest about with anyone. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind pushed at the stone. I count things, she said finally. When I'm nervous, stones in a fireplace, vials in a bag, days since I arrived somewhere. It's a habit from a long time of being somewhere temporary. She paused. I've been counting since I got here. He waited. I haven't counted today, she said. Something happened in his face, slow and careful, like ice shifting in early spring. Not breaking, but beginning to move. Not quite a smile. Something more careful than a smile and more real. The trail will be clear in 2 days, he said quietly. I know. I'm not asking you to stay. I know that too. They sat in the quiet of the study with the fire doing its job and the wind outside doing its, and neither of them said anything else, and it was enough. The council arrived on the morning of the 6th day. There were 4 of them, representatives of the Regional Pack Council, which governed the collective territories in the absence of an overarching authority. They came with horses and formal colors and the particular energy of people who had been waiting for a reason. Mara was in the courtyard with Tomas, reviewing the morning's patient notes when they rode through the gate, and she saw the way the pack around her went still. Not the reverent stillness she'd become accustomed to, but a tighter, warier version. Senna appeared at her elbow. Go inside, she said quietly. What is it? Council business. Go inside and stay in the study. Mara went inside. She did not stay in the study. She went to the corridor window that overlooked the main hall and watched. The council's lead representative was a man named Aldrich. She learned his name from the conversation below, which she could hear clearly through the old stone. He was smooth-voiced and careful in the way that institutional power was careful, each word chosen for what it would not be held accountable for. He sat across from Calder in the main hall with his 3 colleagues arranged behind him and spoke for 10 minutes before she understood what he was actually saying. He was saying that an unmated outsider female had been in Ashveil territory for 6 days. He was saying that the pack had been observed responding to her in the manner consistent with a mate bond recognition. He was saying that under council statute, an unregistered bond in a ruling pack required either formal naming within 7 days of first recognition or the immediate removal of the outsider from the territory to prevent the bond from creating a claim on pack resources without formal accountability. He was saying, in the smooth and careful language of institutional power, that she needed to either be named or be removed. Calder's voice, when he answered, was very flat. The bond is mine, he said. The timeline is mine. The statute exists for the protection of both parties. I'm aware of the statute. The female is an outsider with no registered pack affiliation. She's a healer who pulled 4 pups out of a collapsed den in a storm. Calder's voice didn't rise. It went flatter, which was, she was learning, the more dangerous direction. She's been treating this pack's injured for 5 days at Senna's request. She has not asked for anything. She has not made any claim. The bond creates claim whether or not she asks. The bond is unnamed. A pause. As I said. Aldrich's voice went smoother, which was also, she was learning, the more dangerous direction. There is the matter of precedent. The late Luna's family has an interest in the succession of this territory. An unregistered bond with an outsider could complicate. Don't. One word. Flat and final, and carrying enough weight that the room went very quiet. Do not use her name in an argument about statute compliance. A pause. The council requires a decision by Friday. It's Tuesday, Calder said. You'll have your answer. Mara stepped back from the window. She stood in the corridor for a moment, with her back against the cold stone and her heart doing several things at once, and tried to organize her thoughts into something useful. The council wanted her removed or named. Calder had 3 days. She had not been consulted. She went downstairs. She walked into the main hall while the council representatives were still there, which she could tell immediately was not what anyone had expected, because all 4 of them turned to look at her, and Calder's expression went through several things very quickly before settling back into stillness. "I'm Mara," she said to Aldrich, the outsider with no pack affiliation. "I understand there's a question about my status." Aldrich recovered quickly. He was that kind of man. "There's a matter of council statute, yes. The bond recognition—" "I'm aware of the bond recognition," she said. "I was told about it on the 2nd day. I've been making an informed decision about it since then." She looked at him directly. "The statute requires either naming or removal by Friday. That gives me 3 days to make a choice that will affect the rest of my life. I'd prefer to make it without a council timeline, but I understand that's not on offer." She paused. "Is there anything in the statute that requires the decision to be made by the alpha alone, or does it permit the female party to be part of the conversation?" A silence. Aldrich looked at Calder. Calder was looking at Mara with an expression that was, for the first time, entirely unmanaged. "The statute," Aldrich said carefully, "permits either party to initiate the naming." "Good," she said. "Then the conversation is between me and the alpha, not between the alpha and the council." She held Aldrich's gaze. "Thank you for clarifying the timeline." The council left within the hour. Senna found her in the study afterward and set a cup of tea in front of her, without comment. Then she sat down across the table, which was also new. "He hasn't named anyone since Lyra," Senna said. 6 years. "I know. He's been careful since then about everything." Senna paused. "The pack has been patient with it because they understood, but patience has a shape, and when you arrived—" She stopped. "When you arrived and the pack bowed on the ridge, and he came over that ridge running—" Another stop. "I've worked for him for 9 years. I've never seen him run anywhere." Mara held the teacup. "He told me about her." Senna looked at her. "He told you?" "Yes." A pause. "He hasn't spoken about her to anyone in 4 years." Mara didn't say anything. She looked at the fire. It was burning well. She'd rebuilt it that morning, had found it gone out when she came down and spent 10 minutes coaxing it back. "I'm not going to make this decision because of a statute," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know," Senna said. "He knows that too. It's why he hasn't asked." She found him that evening in the courtyard. He was alone, sitting on the stone bench near the east wall, looking at nothing in particular. The sky above the fortress was the particular dark blue of early night in winter, and the first stars were appearing, and the courtyard was very quiet. She sat down beside him, not close, not far, a considered distance. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer me honestly, not carefully." He turned to look at her. "Are you afraid?" she said. "Not of the council, not of the statute, of this, of naming something again." The silence was long. She let it be long. "Yes," he said. "What specifically?" He looked back at the sky. "That I'll name it, and it will be real, and real things can be lost." A pause. "I've been the absence after Lyra. I learned to function inside it. It became something I knew how to carry." He stopped. "Naming you would mean putting that down, and I don't entirely trust myself to know how to exist without it." She was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," she said. "I do. I've been temporary my whole life, moving between territories, never staying, never being anywhere long enough to be known. I'm very good at leaving. I'm less certain about staying." She paused. "But here's what I'm actually afraid of. I'm afraid you'll spend the rest of your life waiting for me to leave and miss the part where I don't." He turned to look at her again. His eyes were very quiet. "I'm not Lyra," she said. "I'm not a replacement for something lost. I'm a woman who pulled 4 pups out of a collapsed den because she heard them crying, and apparently your bond has known about me since the gate opened, and I've stopped counting things since the 5th day, and I think that means something." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to stop being afraid. I'm asking you to name it anyway." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has made a decision and is simply waiting for the words to catch up. "I don't want you to leave," he said. It came out quieter than everything else he'd said, and more real, and she could hear the exact weight of what it cost him to say it without the armor of flatness. "Then name it," she said, "on Friday, in front of whoever needs to witness it." She paused. "And I'll answer." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You'd answer?" "I'd answer." Something settled in his face, the stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing. Friday came with frost on the stone. The ceremony was held in the main hall because the courtyard was too cold, and Senna had made that decision without consulting anyone. The council's representative, Aldrich, again, smooth-voiced and careful, was present to register the naming. The pack filled the hall in the way packs fill spaces, not crowded but present, occupying the room with the particular weight of collective attention. Calder stood at the front of the hall. He was wearing the formal colors of Ashveil, dark gray and iron, and he looked exactly like what he was, a king who had been ruling alone for 6 years and had learned to carry it well. Mara stood across from him in the clothes she'd arrived in because she hadn't brought anything else, and she found she didn't mind. He spoke the formal words of naming. She had looked them up in the pack law text the night before, so she knew what was coming, but hearing them in his voice, flat and final, but not armored, not managed, each word set down with the full weight of his intention, was different from reading them on a page. The hall was very quiet. She could hear the fire. When he finished, he looked at her. His eyes were gray and very still. She spoke the words of answering. She had also looked those up. They were older than the naming words and simpler, and they meant, "I hear you. I am here. I choose this." She said them clearly, without counting anything. The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds, and then the pack exhaled. Not individually, but collectively, a single long breath that the whole room took together, and several people made sounds that were not quite crying and not quite laughter, and were entirely both. Senna, in the back of the hall, was doing something with her face that she would later describe as dust in her eye. Aldrich registered the naming in his formal ledger with the careful handwriting of a man who was also, Mara noticed, doing something with his face. Calder crossed the space between them and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to hold his gaze. "You answered," he said quietly. "I said I would." "I know." Something moved in his face. The slow, careful thing she'd seen in the study, but fuller now, less guarded. "I know you did." She reached out and put her hand in his. He held it with the particular care of someone who had not held anything in a long time and was remembering how. The hall around them was warm and full of people, and the fire was doing its job, and outside the frost was on the stone, and the 4 pups were somewhere in the east wing with their mother, and it was, in every way that mattered, enough. Later, much later, when the hall had emptied, and the council had gone, and Senna had taken herself off to bed with the satisfied air of someone who had been waiting 9 years for a particular outcome, Mara found herself back in the study. The fire had burned low. She was rebuilding it when she heard his footsteps in the corridor, and then he was in the doorway, and she looked up from the hearth. "You're rebuilding the fire," he said. "It was going out." "Senna would have sent someone." "I know. I was already here." She sat back on her heels. The fire was catching again, small and steady. "I like doing it myself." He came in, crossed the threshold, which she noticed, the full entry rather than the doorway lean, and sat down in the chair across from the hearth. He looked at the fire. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "When did you know?" He paused. "For you." "When did you know you were going to answer?" She considered this. "The second day," she said. "When you told me about the bond, you said before the ridge and then stopped, like the words had gotten ahead of you." She paused. "You're very controlled. The fact that something got ahead of you told me everything I needed to know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I knew at the gate." She looked at him. "The main gate, when I came through?" "Yes. I felt it before I saw you. I was in the East Wing." He paused. "I was running before I understood why. By the time I came over the ridge and saw you standing in the snow with 4 pups inside your coat and 12 of my wolves bowed around you." He stopped. Something moved in his face, quiet and real. "I've been a king for 11 years. I've never run toward anything I didn't understand." She held his gaze. "And now?" "And now," he said, "I think I might be willing to try." The fire was burning steadily now, warm and even, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Outside, the frost was still on the stone, and the fortress was quiet. And somewhere in the East Wing, 4 small wolves were sleeping in a pile, and the bond that had been waiting 6 years had finally, carefully, been given its name. She held his gaze across the hearth. "Not counting anything. Now Pack, a king who spent 6 years learning to carry an absence, and a healer who spent her whole life being somewhere temporary, and the moment they both stopped running in opposite directions." "I want to ask you something. When Calder said he knew at the gate, before he ever saw her, did that change how you felt about everything that came after?" Drop in the comments. Did he wait too long to tell her, or did he tell her at exactly the right moment? And if this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs a good love story tonight. I'll see you at the next fire.